Cool. Well, thanks, Chris, for meeting with me today and joining me on this podcast. I really appreciate your time. So thanks for.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So you have such an amazing story and background. You are a producer, a songwriter. You've referenced yourself as a worship leader, mentor, and would just love to hear about your musical journey from a Christian standpoint. I know you also do secular music, but would just love to hear about your Christian music journey and how you got to, where you are today. And it would be nice. I know all the listeners will love to hear about if you could drop in some nuggets about your American Idol, I guess, stint in that public realm. It would be nice to hear about that too.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in the church. My dad is a missionary, and so I grew up overseas in Germany, and came back to the States. And for my senior year of high school, graduated high school, and went into I was a pre-law major. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And my sophomore year of college, I transferred to a different college that had a music school and started to study music. And studied classically for a long time and thought that was going to be the sort of career path that I took. And then I started writing my own songs in 2001. Really 99, 2000, but recorded my first album in 2001. Began traveling all over the place as a artist and with a band, and we would go play coffee shops and churches and youth groups and wherever would have us come play. And so we did that I did that for 6 or 7 years, and then tried out for American Idol kind of accidentally. A friend of mine invited me to go and try out because he needed someone to try out to be able to. He wanted to go in and kind of film some of the American Idol process from behind the scenes, but he was too old to audition.
Oh.
So he asked me if I would audition, and I did not expect to make it. I'm not really the American Idol material, what typically works for them.
Right.
And so I auditioned and ended up making it all the way to the top 10. And that allowed me to get a record deal and a pub deal, and had a few hits. As an artist and on Christian radio, and then had written a #1 for a band called Rascal Flatts. And then I left the music business for 8.5 years. I was at a place where I wanted to save my marriage, and I thought God was calling me into ministry. And so I went into church work and worked at churches for about 7 years. And then just came back to the music industry about 2 years ago. So that's my 20 years and 2 minutes kind of thing.
Wow, what a journey! That's very impressive. Speaking about some of your hits, there's a song that I've heard over and over again for quite a few years. "Empty Me." I consider that one of your amazing hits. Do you mind just walking me through that journey? Because reading your blog, and I do hope the listeners read your blog. Reading your blog, I think I can get some pieces of how you came about that song, but it'll be nice for you to just break it down and talk about "Empty Me" in particular, and what went through your mind in coming up with that song, and what journey were you going through at that time?
Sure. So one of the, I had written almost all my songs by myself over my whole career because, living in South Carolina, there weren't a lot of people who co-wrote songs, so I had to learn how to write songs by myself. So I wrote a lot of songs by myself. Well, when I came to Nashville and I got my record deal and all that, one of the things that is a big thing in Nashville, it's what I do every day, is you write with other people. And So I was learning how to co-write at the time and really figuring out how to do that process, which is a it's a different process than just writing by yourself, obviously. And so they set me up on a bunch of co-writes, and we had, out of the 13 songs that ended up on that first album, the name of the album was called Running Back to You. Of the 13 songs that were on that first album, I think 8 or 9 of them had already been written by the time that I started co-writing. And so we knew that we needed what, my producer and my manager kept saying, we need the song that sort of explains your process coming from American Idol back to Christian music, because I most people didn't realize that I had been a worship pastor before American Idol. Most people didn't realize that I had grown up in the church. My dad was a missionary, and Christian music is at times very, very protective of their genre and their listeners, and making sure that they're not bringing in a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. And so they were just like, we need a song that explains how you came from American Idol back to Christian music. And in my mind, to be honest, that sounded like a pretty dumb song. Like, I don't know, I always, in my shows, I have this joke. I tell the story about how American Idol came about, and I joke around that we literally for 6 weeks every day tried to write this song, and I would go into every session and I would say, hey, I need to write a song about how I came from American Idol back to Christian music. And they would kind of look, think, and they'd go, man, that sounds kind of like a dumb song to me. And, because so often, we're writing about a journey, not necessarily the details of coming from
Sure.
So, I would joke around with my listeners at my shows, and I had this song that I wrote a little piece of, and I would just go, I was on American Idol, remember me? I took a lot less money to take this Christian record deal, so buy my CD, and it, and people thought that was really funny. But legitimately, like, for 6 weeks, every day, we tried to write this song. And a friend of mine named Tony Wood, who I think at that point had like 25 or 30 number one Christian songs. He was one of my first mentors. Now I think he has over 50 number one Christian songs. But he came into one of our sessions, and we had tried to write this song, before. And he said, hey, that song that you've been trying to write? I think I might have like a little snippet of a lyric that might work for this. I just jotted it down, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, whatever. So he read it off, and it said, empty me of me so I can be filled with you. That was all he had. And I went, oh man, that's really good. I think we could do that. Like that kind of makes sense. So we sort of shaped the lyric, and we wrote music for it that day. And as we came out of the session, I knew that it was a really special song, but it didn't feel like the music was right yet. And so we did like a whole demo of it, and the response by my team was like, man, this is really, really good. But I just kept feeling like the music wasn't quite right. The melody and the music wasn't quite right. So I was in a session maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and with a friend of mine named Clint Lagerberg. And so I brought that into him, and I said, hey, I don't want to play you anything. I just want to take this lyric, and I don't want you to hear the melodies that I have, because I don't want that to influence us. Let's just start from scratch and see what we come up with. And, and that's taking a little bit of a chance on his part, because if we don't beat what I had before, then he's not going to get writer's credit, and so he took a chance that day and really helped me write what ended up being the music and the melody for the song that came out. And it was so much better than the original. And so then I had to bring that back to my team and go, hey, Empty Me, I think it was close last time. Here's a totally different music and melody, and so that ended up as soon as I turned that in, I think everybody on the team felt like that was the song, And so that was the last song I wrote right before we recorded the album, and yeah, it ended up being one of the biggest songs in Christian music for like 3 years in a row in 2008 to 2010. So that was very, very encouraging and exciting, and it opened up a lot of doors for me.
Yeah, no, I do think it's an amazing song. I'm somewhat in awe because, and I'm honored to be talking to you, because I didn't realize until I was doing research on you. I didn't realize, you wrote that song, but that was a song that I was singing, in my car way back when. And it was and is still an amazing song. And I do like the lyrics and what the lyrics are saying to us as Christians. Like, we really need to reflect on ourselves. And really, focus on Christ. And so you wrote that one song, and then you wrote another song called One, which I think is also an amazing song. So could you elaborate on that and how you got to that song?
Yeah. So I, like I said, I was doing some co-writing, and so after, sort of the cycle for us as artists is to often we go through these sort of cycles of we write, we record, then we tour, we write, we record, then we tour. It's that sort of the cycle of the artist. And so as I was writing for my second album, as I was beginning to write for it, I had written the Rascal Flatts song, and it was beginning to be a hit, and we were starting to work on my second album. So it opened up some doors to write with some pop people, and I got a session with this guy from Atlanta named Trayvon, and Trayvon and I ostensibly got together to write pop. And so he came in and he was like, hey man, like I'm a gospel guy. And we started talking about as an African-American man. And we started talking about sort of, he grew up in, in a church that was very like mixed, African-American, whites, Hispanics, like all together in one church. And that was how I grew up. My parents worked with the military. So our church was about 40% African-American. And we were talking, and I said, one of the things that I just really, really miss about the church growing up is, in America, so often, the church is the most segregated, time of the week. Sunday mornings is I think it was Martin Luther King who said that, Sunday mornings are the most segregated time, of the week. And it's true. Like, I went from a church that was 40% African-American to a church that was 3%, African-American here in the States. And I really missed the friendships and the culture of that. So we were just talking, he was saying the same thing, like he had gone to all black churches, I'd gone to all white churches, and we were just talking about like sometimes we wish we could, kind of bridge the gap a little bit and be a part of churches that were more diverse in culture and in skin color. And so, that song came out of just those conversations, and we ended up not writing a pop song at all. We ended up writing, this song called One, and I sort of went through several different arrangements on that one at first. Originally, the original version was a little bit more gospel-y, like it had like a big choir on it.
Oh, wow.
Kind of stuff. And then it sort of landed in that sort of, at the time, there was a very, very popular song on the radio, on mainstream radio by a band called Train, called Hey Soul Sister. And I love, they use a ukulele. We ended up using a mandolin, and so we sort of did like a similar sort of vibe. theirs is a little faster than ours. So it wasn't like we were like straight up ripping it off, but we definitely were copying it.
Got
you
it.
know, pretty good.
Nice.
And so yeah, we did our version, and that ended up being a song that I think has spoken to a lot of people. It wasn't a hit, you know. I mean, it was a top 20 hit, but not like a big
Right.
hit. But it was a song that I probably hear about that song almost as much as I hear about "Empty Me" from
Yeah.
people. I have a couple of songs on that record. You know, that the second record that I put out with Word and Warner Brothers did not do as well as the first record, and yet I would say that the songs on that record have had a much further reach in a lot of
Yeah.
ways than even "Empty Me" did, which was, you know, one of the biggest songs in Christian music for 3 years straight. So for me, that was really exciting. There's another song on that album called "Broken Beautiful"
Yep.
that's one of my favorite songs that I've ever written, and that song has been featured in a couple of movies, and so I think that extended its life pretty far. And so it's exciting to me that songs that were not necessarily hits, or at least not big hits, end up being songs that speak to people in a pretty powerful way.
Yeah. What is that one, I guess, message you're trying to get out there with your music? If you know, with the Christian music that you've written, what's that one message?
Well, I think you know, "Running Back to You" was a collection of songs. You know, they always say that your first album, if you've worked your way, most people work their way into their first major label record. You know, and they say that your first album is like an amalgam of everything you've ever done. So, like, and it was. I mean, I had songs that, like, the first independent album that I ever recorded was called Vessel, and it had a song called Vessel on it, and Vessel is the last song on my major label record. So going back all the way to my very first independent album, and I had recorded 7 records by the time that I finally got signed. I mean, I think there was a song from almost every record that I had recorded that made it onto my major label record. So then I have to come into, so that was like 7 or 8 years of work sort of culminating in this major label album. My second record, then I sort of had to start from scratch, you know, like I had to go, oh, what do I want to say with this one? And at the time I was going through, you know, this wasn't public, but I was coming out of a private time of addiction and had just confessed a bunch of stuff to my wife and some people in my family, and was getting help for the addiction that I was going through, and was getting therapy for the first time in my life, and it revolutionized my life in ways that have been very, very helpful. And so the second album I ended up titling "The Anatomy of Broken."
Right.
Because almost every song on that album ended up talking about brokenness, because I was coming to terms with my own brokenness, and at the time my belief that the only fill for that hole was God. And so on the second album, you can see a pretty straight through line for like the struggle that I was having with my own brokenness, and coming to terms with my own brokenness, that I wasn't as good of a guy as I thought I was. I wasn't the hero that a lot of people would put me up on a pedestal, and that I like to think that I was, because I wrote good songs, you know. And coming to that realization of being really, really humbled and broken down in the best way. So I would say that probably, in my opinion, "The Anatomy of Broken," although that album did not sell as well as the first record, I actually think "The Anatomy of Broken" is a much, much better record. You know, from top to bottom, I think that the songs are really, really special and honest. And in fact, it took me several years after releasing it to really be able to listen to it, because it was so raw and vulnerable and honest in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's, I would say that probably if there's a big message from my music, probably "The Anatomy of Broken" is that big message.
Yeah. No, I must admit it. The tracks and the Anatomy of Broken are amazing, and they speak to, you can tell different aspects of your life, and it's very comforting to see and hear you speak about, you know, some of the struggles you've gone through, and be open with it in your music, because that's what speaks to people. You know, a lot of people, I guess, don't understand or think, you know, because you're a Christian, everything has to be perfect. There's that concept out there, which is the biggest lie ever told in my mind. You know, it's
yeah. I think that was one of the things that I was sort of bucking against at the time was so much of Christian music had become about being uplifting and encouraging. And I do think that there is a place for that, obviously. Like, no one wants to feel down, and no one, you know, wants to feel. But I felt like that when I was coming up, and what I loved about Christian music when I was growing up was I could listen to a Stephen Curtis Chapman song and hear the admittance of fault and the admittance of brokenness, and Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant, and go down through the legends, you know, that Jars of Clay, For Him, like all the bands that I grew up listening to. And I was a Christian music nerd, you know, like, you know, I would comb the credits. I knew who played on every record, you know, that ever was, and I know who wrote the songs. I knew who did everything. It was such an honor on my first album to be able to have Brown Bannister produce my album, because Brown had produced Amy Grant and, you know, Stephen Curtis Chapman and Mercy Me and all these bands and artists that I really looked up to. And I remember having that conversation with Brown where he was like, what do you want to do with your music? And I said, man, honestly, like, I just want to be honest, you know, as honest as I can be. And obviously, you know, honesty is as much about being honest with yourself as it is being honest with other people. And I think it takes people time to break down the barriers within their own minds and their own selves to be able to be truly honest with themselves. And so the honesty that you hear on Running Back to You, the first album, is very different than the honesty that you find on Anatomy of Broken. And I think that's beautiful, and I think that's okay. But yeah, honestly, like, I was trying to bring a depth back to lyrics that I hadn't heard in a while. And I don't know if I succeeded or not, but I know that for me, what I was trying to do was something that was very different than what I was hearing from other artists at the time. And maybe that's why the second album didn't do as well as, you know, as the first one.
Right.
But I'm still intensely proud, you know, not in a prideful way, but proud of, as in, I did the work. I know that is honest, you know, honest and vulnerable. And that's all that I could do as, you know, a young man trying to say what I wanted to say.
Right. No, but, you know, Chris, to be very frank, I personally think at the end of the day, as long as your music speaks to, even if it's just one person, and touches that one person in the right way, it's a success. And I know your album has done that for, I don't know how many thousands of people. So whether the record label says it did well or not, you know, that's one thing. It's the fact that it touched somebody and potentially, you know, healed somebody or helped them, you know, find counseling or go and talk to somebody or find Christ, you know, as long as it did that, it's a success in my book. So congratulations for being very vulnerable and speaking to the world through your music and through your lyrics. I think it's fantastic. Now, one of the things, I did a ton of research about you, and you are an amazing writer. I hope you write a book at some point in time, because your penmanship, if that word is still used, because we're all type now, your penmanship is phenomenal. And I, in your blog, which is called Emotional Refugees, you talk about an experience you had back in Bob BJU or Bob Jones University, and your experience there, and how it seems like, you know, a path may have changed there. it'll be interesting if you could share that with folks and what happened, and now your view on the world. And it because it seems from reading that it had a huge impact on your life, because you're in a stairwell, you hear somebody talking, you go in and the guy just blatantly lies in front of your face. I mean, how has that impacted you, and can you just share that story with people?
Yeah, I think that I grew up in a very, very conservative, fundamental sect of Christianity called the IFB, the Independent Fundamental Baptists, and it was a lot of authoritarian, sort of Christian leadership, a lot of really mind control, and keeping everyone. I once read a quote. I can't remember who said it. Maybe G.K. Chesterton, where he said, religion is a comfort for the old and a fetter for the young. Mm. And what he means by that is that religion is oftentimes just comfort that there's something after when we die, and it's also used to control young people, and be a fetter, to a governor of sorts, slow, young people down. And I think that felt really, really true, of the religion that I grew up in. And so for me, when I was 21, 22 years old, I got kicked out of my college with 7 credits left to graduate. I was supposed to go to Juilliard the next year, and it obviously changed the course of my life. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now probably if that had not happened. There's some alternate universe where Chris Sligh is didn't get kicked out of college and is like an opera singer.
There you go. Crazy. There you go. Yeah.
And and so I think looking back, I think when I left the Bob Jones world, I underestimated how difficult it would be to leave one's tribe, because I think that most people have the sort of tribe that they've been a part of for most of their life, if not all of their life. And for me at least, I think what ended up happening when I left my tribe at 21, 22 years old is it sort of set me on this path of not really having a place to call home spiritually, or even, my wife and I have lived in, I think, 13 or 14 different houses, since we've been married. We worked at a couple of this church, and then worked at this church, and then worked at this church. And I think that as I was writing that blog, I was coming to this realization that needing a tribe of people that you call your own, that you call home, is actually part of the human nature, right? And so how finding that group of people that you call your own, and being able to put roots down and be able to love people in the way that I think that I want to love people, that I think that Jesus calls us to love people, that Paul calls us to love people. That was something that I was desiring, and coming to the realization as I wrote that blog that I had unwittingly, I did the right thing in leaving, but what I should have done looking back, but you can't, you don't know.
Of course.
You don't know. But looking back, probably what I should have done was find a place to put down roots, and to have that tribe that was my own, and bought into something that was bigger than myself. And I'm really grateful for the journey that I've been on, because I think that, the 8.5 years of therapy that I've been able to have in my life has been revolutionary. I think that I love people in a way that is beautiful, and I don't know that I would have gotten to that without the journey,
Yeah.
So all that to say that I'd love for people to read the blog because I think it's actually one of my better pieces of writing,
Yeah.
But I think that really what it comes down to is like this understanding of we need people, like we were not made to be alone. And I think that when I left the IFB, I put myself on a journey that I was very alone for a long time. And now I'm just sort of putting down roots. My wife and I have been in Nashville for 5 years. I have my songwriting and artist community that I'm a part of now that I'm really investing in and buying into and helping other artists find their voices and be exactly who and what they're supposed to be. And so, but yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed that blog. That was several years back as I was sort of working through some of these big ideas of what it means to be an adult, you know?
Yeah. No, it's, I really do hope people read it. It went into great detail, and it was really phenomenal watching your journey, because you could see the wheels turning in your mind and your world changing. It was very apparent and very powerful. So thank you for writing it, and I do hope everyone reads that blog. So coming to the end of this, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be? I know in one of your blogs you wrote, or somewhere I read, you were talking about your legacy. You actually talked about your children and all of that. So what would that one thing you want people to remember you for?
It's interesting you ask that, because I think that it's been solidified in the last few days. Bob Saget, the comedian and the guy that was on Full House, the dad on Full House, passed away a few days ago. Yeah. And I was never like a big Bob Saget fan or anything, but I'm a fan of a lot of his friends, and they show up on my, social media or YouTube. And I don't know how I got sucked into the whole of just watching. I bet you in the last week or since his passing, I've watched maybe 50 different videos from people talking about Bob Saget. And the thing that is consistent, and it's been kind of mind-blowing actually, the thing that has been consistent across every single one of them is them not talking about his comedy, not talking about his highly successful career as a TV actor and as a comedian and all that. What every single one of them talks about is how well he loved, and how he loved his family, and how he loved his wife, how he loved them, how he was always there for them. And I watched a video last night where John Mayer had gone to pick up Bob Saget's car from the airport, because Bob had flown to his last gig, passed away, and so his car was stuck at the airport, and they went to go get it. And as they're driving back in Bob's car, he's driving with another comedian, and literally at times weeping, talking about how good Bob loved. And it gets me a little choked up actually now thinking about it. And I thought about this as I was falling asleep last night. I just processed through, that's the legacy that I want to leave. I want to leave the kind of legacy that, whenever, I pass away, that sure, I want for the work to speak for itself. I want for the songs to have spoken to people. I would love for there to be a second career, because I left the music business for 8.5 years and am just back for 2 years now. And I would love for there to be this second wind in my career where I get to have hits again. But way, way, way more important to me is this idea that all the people who are in this circle understand exactly how much I love them, and how much that I'm the guy that they can call at 3 a.m. when they're struggling with, tough thoughts and need someone to talk them off the ledge, so to speak. Um, and yeah, I think that that's the legacy. You know, my wife and my kids and the people that I adopt as my family, that I want for them to know exactly how much they are loved by me.
Yeah. Well, I do think well, I'm going back to the song that, you said wasn't a big hit, but, one talks about love a lot. I mean, that
Yep.
entire song is really about loving everyone and everyone loving themselves and each other. So I do think you have already put that song out and that message out, and I hope it resonates with people. And you are right. I mean, mostly in this day and age, with people passing away for not just because of COVID, but it just seems like a lot of amazing people are passing away for no apparent reason. It makes you think and reflect on life. It's not about the material things. It's more about the heart and what you leave out there. So I do hope and pray that you are able to accomplish that as your legacy. I do think you've already started, and you started a long time ago with your singing and your music, and I pray you're able to achieve it to the point you would like to achieve it. But your songs speak to it, and your children will forever have those songs that they can listen to and see how amazing Daddy is and Daddy was, whenever that happens. So
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Have
Take
a great
care.
one.
Bye-bye.